Hello everyone. On the first day of SEM 2 presentation, on the SEM 2 presentation from the paper number 106, the 20th century literature 1900 to World War II, I choose the topic Yeats' religious quest and politics for my presentation. Here are my personal information. Now let's see something about W.B. Yeats and his life. William Butler Yeats, known by his short name W.B. Yeats, was born on June 13, 1865 in Sandymount, Dublin, Ireland, and died on January 28, 1939 in France. He was an Irish poet, dramatist, and prose writer, and one of the greatest English language poets of the 20th century. He was one of the founders of the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. His father, John Butler Yeats, was a descendant of Jervis Yeats, a Williamite soldier, Lenin merchant, and well known painter who died in 1712. His mother, Susan Pollexfen, was a daughter of a prosperous merchant in Sligo in Western Ireland. Now, soon after William's birth, the family relocated to the Pollexfen home at Sligo to stay with her extended family, and the young poet came to think of the area as his childhood and spiritual home. He proposed Maud more than three times in his life, but she never accepted. Then he ended up marrying Georgia Hydlis on 20th October 1970, when he was around 52 and she was only 26. Even though the age gap, their marriage was successful and had two children, and Michael. Although in the later years he had romantic relationship with other women, Georgia herself wrote to her husband, "When you are dead, people will talk about your love affairs, but I shall say nothing, for I will remember how proud you were." This line connects before the marriage of this lady and Yeats, that everyone warned her that why you are marrying an old man, he will soon dead. Even though she married, the Nobel Prize in Literature 1923 was awarded to William Butler Yeats, and noted that for his always inspired poetry, which in highly artistic form gives expression to the spirit of a whole nation. Now, his writing style. Now, Yeats was a famous poet who lived in the 20th century. He used a writing style called symbolism, which means he used words and images to suggest deeper. We can see that in his poems, the Tower and On Being Asked for a War poem. The second coming a symbol is a symbol about this Wagner, and that he often used physical objects to represent larger and more important concepts. Yeats was indeed a modernist poet, but his style of writing was mostly in traditional form. In his poems, there are many things which draw our interests, like metaphors, symbols, political point of view, religion, sense of history, and humanity, etc. In his lifetime, mostly in last days, he wrote about his personal life more than traditional form, about his children, about his wife, and about a woman whom he loved, but she never accepted his proposal. We can see that in this poem by him named The Tower. In that tower, she mostly describe about that woman. Here are two lines: "Does the imagination dwell the most upon a woman won or woman lost?" Now, indeed, he is considered as a modern poet, but he also shows interest in areas like love, religion, mysticism, politics, aristocracy, history, historical myth, etc., which make him a remarkable poet of the 20th century. Here are some of his different kinds of poetry, which is different from each other. Now, religion and Yeats. How he connected with religion? Yeats' connection with religion is simply noticeable by his writing style, which he wrote poems. Yeats grew up during a time when power was shifting away from the Protestant minority in Ireland. In the 1880s, a man named Charles Stuart Parnell and his home rule movement became more influential. In the 1890s, there was a lot of support for nationalism, and Irish Catholics became more prominent. These changes had a big impact on Yeats' poetry, and his exploration of Irish identity played a major role in shaping how people understand the history of Ireland. Sprinkle of Christian religion about apocalypse invisible the poem The Second Coming by him, which also gives the glimpse of terror about flu pandemic at that time. So here in this poem, there are two types of meaning. First is apocalypse, and second about pandemic and terror, and also this say a religion, Christian religion. Of course, he wrote religious poem, but they aren't devotional one. Devotional poetry means poetry which are for prayer and worship, but he wrote something different, of course, with religion, but something different. Now his connection with politics and his poem named Politics. When we talk about the connection between Yeats and politics, we firstly think about his very famous poem, which includes a political note named On Being Asked for a War Poem. Yeats was an Irish nationalist and appointed to the Irish Senate in 1922, which somehow is a cause of his political writing. It is now the poem named Politics, which describes uh, not a direct meaning of politics, as it describes. This poem has hints of politics in it, but considered it secondary and said, how can I focus on politics of Rome, Russia, and Spain while a charming girl standing beside me, which we can see in first lines. How can I, that girl stand there, my attention fixed on Roman or on Russian or on Spanish politics. Now, there are travelers and politicians who have knowledge about their own field, and what they are saying about war is also true. But who can focus on that when my young age calling love? This we can say in the last lines, that of course there are travelers and politicians and they saying about war and wars all around, but how can I focus on that and held her in my arm? Now, this poem, like his other poem, has a contradictory title. Of course, this poem has title named Politics, but he described politics as a secondary thing. He was talking about politics and war as if it is not necessary than love and women. This poem was written in 1938 during the Spanish Civil War and composed posthumously. This poem is most likely talking about his private feelings, which is important in politics and society. By referring to this above point, we can see that how he tries to distract the situation and tension which was happening at that time during the war time. Of course, because of this, there are so many movements also emerged, like this theater of absurd, comedy of manners, absurdity, and these things. So here is my work citation. Thank you. um, my presentation is over. You can ask questions.
Yes, Pooja. Which writing style of work makes him more famous?
Yeats used to write in so many forms. He can write in religion, politics, and everything. But most of there are two writing style of him about his religion and politics, which I included in my presentation. It is the most famous and most likely to like him. He can write, and these two things most important.
Pooja, how do you believe this poetry can be used to affect social and political change?
Um, of course, there are so many poems which he wrote for politics, which can aware how politics works and how we cannot issued in that politic thing. But when we talk about change, change is something that we human personally can feel by poems, by reading poems, and by by reading poems and saying things through the poem, it of course it is a first step of changing. The second step is changing when we think about it and when we apply in our life. His poems are direct satire on politics, and that's why it is more effective than other political poems, because in that poem sometimes it is a direct satire and sometimes it is symbolical satire, which made us thinking about this poem and think about how politics works, our life, and how this society and social thing works in our life.
Use that stand, stone half, faces at the water only.